Okay, this is Algebra 1. We are on to lesson 2.6. So let's start with our warm-up. So we want to solve for x. So we're going to add 10 to both sides because we do the opposite operation. So x should be 14. On this one, we want to solve for s. So we subtract 5, and the answer is s equals -7. Down here, we want to get rid of the -8, so we divide by -8. So my answer is -4. Here I have two steps. First, I need to get rid of the 2 by multiplying by 2 on both sides. So then I get m plus 4 equals 14. And then I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. So m is 10. Okay. Same thing here. I'm going to add 5 to both sides. So x comes out to -9. Down here, subtract 5 from both sides. 2t equals 40. Divide by 2, and t is 20. Okay? So today we're going to look at solving equations in one variable that have an absolute value. Okay? So we need to talk about what is an absolute value first. Well, remember that an absolute value of a number is the number's distance from 0. Okay? It's always a positive number. So -5 is 5 units from 0, as is +5. It's always our positive. Okay? So for any non-zero absolute value, there are two numbers with that absolute value. To write the statement using algebra, you would write the absolute value of x equals 5. And this says what values of x would equal 5, the absolute values of them. Well, I could either plug in -5, and that would be the correct answer, or I could plug in +5. So x could be -5 or +5 because it's an absolute value. So here's a little description again. The equation just says the absolute value of x equals a, so meaning I would have the negative and the positive of whatever number I'm looking for. That's really important, okay? Remember, absolute values must be non-negative because it's a distance. So the absolute value of something's always positive, but what's inside might be negative. So today we're going to look at solving these absolute value equations. And to do this, these are the 3 steps you need to do. You need to isolate the absolute value, so get the absolute value part by itself. Then we're going to set up 2 cases. You always are going to need to set up 2 cases that don't have an absolute value sign. And then you will solve for your 2 answers. So I'm going to show you what I mean. This can be a little confusing, but hang with me. All right. So here we go. The absolute value of x is 12. Well, we know that there can be 2 possible answers. So our absolute value, step 1, is always to isolate the absolute value. Well, it's already isolated, okay? So we don't have to worry about that. Once we have it isolated, we set up 2 cases. What you do is you take what's in the absolute value with no absolute value signs, and you set it equal to the negative and the positive of whatever's on the side. So then that tells you your 2 answers, a 12 and a -12. I think it might help if I show you something a little different. Okay, step 1 is to always get what's in the absolute value by itself. So we have x plus 7 in absolute value. To get it by itself, we need to get rid of this 3. And to get rid of that 3, we need, let me erase that. We need to divide by 3 because it's being multiplied by 3. So now I have x plus 7 in absolute values equals 8. Okay, we've done step 1. We've gotten the absolute value part by itself. Step 2 says to set up the 2 cases. And the way we do this is we take what's inside the absolute value, and we don't use absolute values anymore. So we're going to copy what's inside the absolute value 2 times. And then we set it equal to the positive of this side and the negative of this side. Lastly, you solve each side by itself. So on this side, we get 1. When I subtract 7 from here, I get -15. So my two solutions are 1 and negative 15. Okay, let's look at another example. Just a hint, be sure to always check both sides. So when I did this, I should plug in into the original problem. I should plug in my 1 and make sure that's correct. So 3 times 8 is 24. I should also plug in the negative 15. That should be a positive 7. So inside I would have a negative 8, which makes a positive 8, which still is 24. So they're both correct. Okay, so just always check both solutions. Let's try another one. Okay, get what's in the absolute value by itself. Well, we're lucky this time. You see there's nothing else outside of the absolute values, so we're already at that step. So now we take what's inside and we rewrite it 2 times. Set up 2 cases. I should see this on your paper. It equals, we take the positive and the negative version of that number. So now I solve them separately. So my answer is x equals 10.5 on this side. When I add this, I will get x equals 5.5. So my answers are 10.5, comma, 5.5. Again, you should check your answer by plugging this into the x and this into the x, okay? This table kind of gives you a step-by-step guide. I think this is always good to have out when you're solving these. Use the inverse operations to isolate the absolute value. Rewrite it with 2 cases and then solve each case by itself. Here's something I really need you to pay attention to. Not all absolute value equations have 2 solutions. So here's when this happens. If the absolute value ever equals 0, so if I have like x plus 5 equals 0, there is only one solution to solve for, because you can't say for your 2 cases x equals positive 0 and x equals negative 0. That's not an option, okay? So it's only going to have one solution. If an equation has an absolute value equal to a negative number, meaning like x plus 5 equals negative 2, there you would say it is no solution, because you can't, whenever you take the absolute value of something, it always becomes positive. So this is the 2 things you need to watch out for. But again, you can only check this once you've gotten the absolute value part by itself, okay? So let's look at 2 examples and then we'll be done. Or I have 3 examples actually. Okay, first step is to isolate the absolute value signs. So add 8 to both sides. Well, when I add 8 on this side, I get x plus 2. Now what happens here? I get the absolute value is equal to 0. Well, if it's equal to 0, I can only have one case. So that means I can only set up x plus 2 equals 0. Now I solve, and my answer is x equals negative 2. So I only have negative 2 as my answer because it equals 0. Next one, okay? Subtract the 3 because it's being added here. So I get x plus 4 equals negative 3. Once you have isolated, meaning you can't make this decision until this is by itself, if it's isolated and it equals a negative number, it is no solution. Only after you've isolated, okay? Let's do one last problem. Okay, I'm going to subtract 2 because there's a positive out here. You need to keep this negative sign out in front. It hasn't gone away yet. Okay, you can't make the judgment right here that this is a negative number. Because I have a negative out in front here, I still have to divide by a negative, and I get 2x. Sorry, let me erase this. 2x minus 5 equals equals a positive 9 now. Now I can set up my two cases. So case 1, 2x minus 5 equals 9, and case 2, 2x minus 5 equals negative 9. Now I just solve both sides. X is equal to 7. On this side, I'm going to get negative 4, and x is equal to negative 2. So my two solutions are 7 and negative 2. Okay? So we'll do some more practice in class, and we are done.